it's a place where people are free to post information, and for the most part, if you post something, I'm going to leave it there. It isn't necessarily going to stay there if I don't think it contributes to a conversation, or if I think that it goes beyond what I think is good conversation. I'm not going to have the group page get hijacked. It is something that I want to be there as a service, just like the show itself is. You know, I've said it before. This program is available for anybody to come on. I mean, if somebody wants to place a call and say, "Look, I've got an issue. I'd like to come onto your show and discuss it," by all means, I welcome all comers here. If you are going to talk about a controversial issue, then you're going to have some controversial questions raised about it. So it isn't just a forum for people to come on and demonstrate. But if somebody wants to have a conversation that is meaningful and useful to Native people, then that's what the show is for. That's what my group page is for. I also write a blog. It's called Native Pride. If you go to www.letstalknativepride.blogspot.com or just Google search Native Pride, you'll find my blog. On my blog, I do post all of the shows. I post other videos and links. I write an article from time to time, not as often as I'd like to write, but I encourage everybody to go there. And the reason especially the Native listeners and people who are interested in the Native subject, because you should at the very least be seeing what apparently the federal government is spending an awful lot of time doing. Because I do have a blog tracker, and I do notice how often the federal government goes onto my blog. And it's a place for you to see what they're seeing. It's a place for you to actually comment on stories written. And again, anybody who offers a comment or a question on any of the comment sections will encourage more conversation. They'll encourage more posting on the issues. I'm glad the federal government is spending so much time, and I'm talking about the Treasury Department, the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, even the U.S. Senate. I even had the president of the United States, his ISP actually logged on to my and that's the office of the executive of the United States, the President of the United States. That was logged on to my blog.
You can't ride with me anymore.
Well, again, it's like I always said, everybody wonders. For 2 hours a week, everybody knows where I am. So, again, I'm not nervous about it. I mean, there are some people who say, isn't that a little creepy that the federal government's snooping around on your blog? Well, I'm trying to communicate a message. I'm trying to get this message to them. I wish they would be a little bit more forthright and be willing to engage us in a conversation, which is something that you and I are still working on. I know I'm pushing to try to get this meeting with Jody Gillette. So Jody, if you are listening, I am trying to get a meeting with the White House to discuss, first and foremost, the floor tax issue. This is a new tax that's been shoved down our throats, and I walked this issue through Gillibrand's office and Higgins' office. They went only so far with me before they bailed. They admitted that this floor tax provision of their CHIPRA law was created what they described as an unintended consequence. They didn't mean for this to turn into the incident that it has, where for the first time in our history, the federal government is trying to tax a product after the fact. After it's already, not only after it's come to our territory, but even after it's came and been sold, they're trying to impose a tax, and they're saying that because they raised the federal excise tax effective on April 1st, 2009, that this one area of the federal government, this TTB office, is trying to say, well, we're going to make an assessment on how much product we think people had on hand when the clock struck midnight, and we're gonna send a tax bill. And they did that. They sent it to all kinds of people. In fact, I think you received one, Ross. We don't need to talk about it specifically here, but you were among those people that received an assessment from the TTB office.
I was, and in my defense is that they were totally off base.
Well, of course, because from what I understand, anybody who got these things sent to them for a mail order, which is the whole beauty of what the mail order business was over. And of course, most of those mail orders are shut down now because they've also passed other laws that put them out of business. But mail order was one of these things that operated on a person would call in an order. That's when you would take delivery. Anytime you took delivery of product for a mail order customer, that was already bought and sold. I mean, it was already paid for. So that product would come in and go out either the next day or the same day.
What they wanted to accuse us of is stockpiling, but that wasn't a practice that I was interested in.
Well, and most weren't.
I didn't want a warehouse. I didn't want a warehouse. I didn't want to pay for security. I didn't want to do all that.
Well, and that's
So-
the whole purpose of a mail order was to
Right.
cut that overhead expense down. Now, but the fact of the matter is, everybody in the United States knew that cigarettes were going up $6.16 on April 1st.
Right.
So even though there was a bit of a run on product, and you guys, everybody, all your customers they were stocking up,
Sure,
which they have the right to do because once they took possession of it, it didn't matter if they weren't going to get charged a floor tax. So the reality is, all of the customers had the right and the opportunity to purchase product in advance of the tax increase, as they did. And what the federal government then turned around and said, well, we're interpreting that run of product was that, and I don't know if they did this to everybody else. We're only talking about native retailers and wholesalers being hit with this thing.
Mhm.
But this is the thing that we're trying to push. I have some folks in Washington that are trying to, since both Higgins and Gillibrand's office bailed on trying to facilitate a meeting with the senior policy advisor to the White House. They were all full in. They were totally engaged. And then, as I was told from Brian Higgins' office, that they had indirect pressure to bail on facilitating for this meeting from the Seneca Nation. Now, I know which Seneca counselors were in support of this thing, and I kind of know which ones were against it. But I also know that there was probably, I don't think it's a ridiculous assumption to make that out of the Porter's specific administration, I know there are people like Leslie Logan and some of the others who have really tried to undermine not only this show, but some of the efforts that we've made collectively. And this isn't about John Kane. This is about the issue. And what I was told, and again, she was being very careful. This is the staffer from Higgins' office. They made it very clear that they were told indirectly to bail on the idea of facilitating a meeting with the White House. Now, why would anybody at any level of governance or any place else, why would anybody want to stop a conversation that could have advanced this issue and on our position on this thing? I mean, that to me, that's just gutting an effort.
It goes back to what we were talking. I mean, we were talking about specific things with the Seneca Nation. You know, the Kinzu Dam, where we've seen large turnaround of indoctrination, and you know, the education system. But there was things that were happening and are still kind of malignant in our communities. That when an individual, you know, that believes that they are above the wisdom of the whole, you know, and believe that their people are there to be governed, and it is up to them to lead, was also something that has been a major problem for Native people across the country.
You take this issue in particular. You and I went and paid a visit to Brian Higgins' office. We talked with their staffer. We essentially did what nobody else had done. We'd gotten not only this staffer, but I followed up that meeting with Gillibrand's office. So I got both a congressman and a senator to admit that they never took us into consideration when they passed this law. We got them to admit that it was unintended for this to turn into a new tax to be imposed on our territories. And nobody else had done that. I got two of the people, and
Right.
again, you were a part of that conversation. We got the legislators who pushed, promoted, and voted for this law to admit it was a mistake. And then we get that effort gutted from us by some powers within Seneca Nation.
I believe we were right. I believe we were on a positive path. But again, somebody was threatened. Somebody felt like we didn't have the authority.
So,
Why?
and it wasn't about the message; it was about the messengers.
It was about the messenger, because me and you are two of the people that somebody feels should be governed. You know,
in spite of the fact that the issues that we're trying to fight for
Right.
is for everybody. I don't have a dog in this fight. I mean, I don't have a smoke shop. I had no product held on any shelf that I'm aware of that was going to be subject to this tax. So this was something that I felt like I was in a spot to raise this issue, and you were a part of that effort.
Yes.
Well, again, I'm gonna try to be punctual about stopping at the right times here because of some of the technical difficulties. So I want to take a break here. We'll go into the second hour after this break, after the news break. But I've got Ross John in studio. I've got Ed Schindler in studio. We're going to keep going on this subject because I think this is something that people need to understand. And we're going to talk about more of what these cooperatives could accomplish in the second hour. Again, this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back. thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I've got Ross John in studio. I've got Ed Schindler in studio. You know, look, we're talking a little bit about how the sense of community used to be, and we all know that, and we don't have to go back 200 years or 300 years. You know, the idea of families being a little bit more engaged with each other was something that was it was normal. And I'm not saying we didn't have problems. We always had problems.
Sure.
But the reality is, we need to create some sort of shift to get our people back more engaged in the communities. And you've talked about this idea of cooperatives. Now, the only difference between what we're talking about here with cooperatives is we are talking about organizing them a little bit more. So if we know that somebody's got either time to offer to various things that we talked about with these co-ops, if they got time, or if they got equipment, or if they simply have dollars. The idea of trying to organize so we can address certain issues, and some of the things we talked about, agriculture, food, but even beyond that, there's disaster relief. I mean, we have a storm come through. I mean, if you've got a chainsaw and your neighbor's got a tree down in his yard, maybe that doesn't seem like it would need much organization. But if you start looking at that on a community level, all of a sudden you realize, well, maybe we need to do an assessment. I mean, who needs help? And I know that there's a Seneca Nation agency that can help out with that. But again, you're never going to have the personnel sitting waiting for the next disaster. But we as human beings, we're all neighbors. So if somebody needs help, if somebody's got a tree fell on their house, then let's do what we can at least to deal with the thing in the most immediate fashion. So we put together a bit of a cooperative. So people are already lined up if a situation happens. I know people rise to the occasion when disaster happens. But if we can organize this a little bit, then people will know, okay, hey, I know who to call if I'm in trouble. I mean, we'll put a contact person associated with perhaps a disaster relief. We can talk about elders issues, whether it's transportation or whether it's really just looking after, because not everybody has the same resources. If we had a little bit more of a cooperative effort, a community effort to deal with some of those things, then we can look at things like services for elders, services for the youth, winterization programs. I mean, I know there's a program within the Seneca Nation, but if we know that there are contractors, if we know there are people with dollars, if we know there are people who've got time, or some skill set they can offer that can be employed in this regard. I mean, there's playgrounds. The one in Indian Hill still isn't finished to this day, and I know that there's an ongoing effort, and I'm not trying to dog the success of that project. But if we knew that there was a better way, not just for the business leaders, because some of it's not just about dollars. Sometimes it's just about human beings. I mean, somebody's got to get the contract for mowing the grass at these things. So maybe it's not just about contracting with somebody. Maybe it's about who's willing to volunteer. So I think about all of these things that we need. I mean, does anybody ever assess who may or may not need firewood, for instance? I know there's federal programs, there's the HEAP program, and there may be some other programs within the Seneca Nation. But what about just a pile of firewood that people donate to? So if somebody needs it, that it's there for them. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we can talk about doing.
Those are exactly the things that we need to talk about doing. I mean, and there are you're right. We have to better organize it, because some of these situations are out there. People do have firewood. People do have chainsaws, and people have trucks, and there are people. I do want to recognize there are people that are, when it snows, they're on their tractor.
They're doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But again, if we organize it more,
we need to organize it, and we need to empower people, but it comes from that sense of community. I think there's been so many people that have been disenfranchised from their own community and don't understand their responsibility. People don't understand their responsibility to their own families, and extended families, and then their neighbors, and so those are the things that the system that we've been indoctrinated in is basically saying, well, we'll have an agency or somebody else go fix it.
Well, I think about Michael Martin with the Native American Community Services.
Right.
they have a food pantry issue that they're dealing with all the time. Who on their territory ever talks about putting together something where people can donate canned goods, or when you're doing a canning project?
We're just talking about it now.
So that's exactly it. We start to reach out a little bit more. And Ed, you brought up on the ride in here that this does not have to be something mutually exclusive from what the nation is involved in. There can actually be some cooperation, and in fact, there could be good cooperation between a community cooperative effort, and perhaps the nation agencies that are currently trying to fulfill some of these obligations. So it doesn't have to be something. They don't have to be competing interests. They can be something that even in the absence of being really clearly organized between the two, they can dovetail to each other. So I mean, there are going to be people that are nation employees that do certain things along these lines, but it doesn't have to be just through a nation agency that it gets done.
One of the things that does happen, and I think it's good, is the effort that's done between the townships and the territory, whether it's for firefighting, whether it's for emergency vehicle, whether it's for just emergency, like when the flood hit Gowanda Silver Creek, there was a lot of concerted effort from all the different towns. Okay, now the people feel good about that because that's a common effort toward a common cause, and it's a good cause. Take care of the people. But what I'm saying is, let's do it within our territory, not just because we're going to be getting good publicity.
Yeah, yeah.
Not because we're going to be getting our pictures in the paper, whatever. Basically, once upon a time, it was done because that's what you did. That was the norm. It wasn't the abnormal effort. It was the normal effort.
Well, and like I said, there are disaster issues, but there's also emergency issues. And some of those emergency issues may be more tied to even, again, the security of our own territory. And, and I hate to get down to this thing, but these federal raids. I mean, how do you not organize yourself enough so that if the state and federal government decides that they're going to infringe on our territories, that we aren't organized? So that same level of cooperative structure that we're talking about for things like food and shelter and disaster relief can also be applied to being able to step up when there is even a security issue.
Again, it has gone from administration to administration. I've personally been asked in the past by ATF personnel if they could come on, asking for permission to come on. And what we told them back then is that no, we understand your situation. And at the time they were saying that we're really looking for somebody out of Long Island that is a non-native who is doing this and doing that, and
so they want to use us to set somebody else up. Yeah.
And what we basically said is that no, you basically told us that you know what they're doing. They're outside there. You need to stop them outside there. You're not going to use our people, and you're not going to bring any of our people in. And that was only, maybe 12 years ago. But there were times when also that a mutual and sometimes not so mutual relationship with the state police and other personnel.
Yeah, if you're trying to do something because you're trying to fulfill some responsibility of whether it's drug enforcement or whatever else, I would much rather our people step up to that than using the outside. But the thing is, there are other circumstances. Think about somebody goes into a shop and robs it. I mean, if you have a better network within our communities, so we can say, look, and everybody can know to look for a vehicle or look for a car or identify somebody.
Sure.
If we've got a child predator in the area, whatever. This isn't just about us being able to combat infringement by state or federal authorities.
Right.
Some of the security that I'm talking about is securing us against all threats, foreign and domestic, so to speak.
Well, and exactly, and because we got to realize that we're not on an island. We're going to have to deal with these things. The best working relationship that I've ever seen is when an administration has basically said to all off-territory law enforcement and personnel is that we'll call you when we need you.
Well, I think back. Do you remember when they were trying to push the? I think it was the issue over pull tabs and that kind of stuff. I mean, when they were sending in federal agents, and oftentimes federal agents, everybody thinks FBI. But sometimes these federal agents might be BIA agents they put people undercover. I remember Jeff Miracle. I think he was working for Cy Schindler's place, Big Indian Smoke Shop. He was took a very strong position and threw some agents out of there. But the problem is, if it's only if we aren't organized enough to know that everybody's going to do that,
Right.
it makes it. We can take a much bolder stand. Whether it's against a federal agency or a state agency, or whether it's a threat from somebody who just is trying to take advantage of our territory.
Well,
If we have a more unified stance on that, and again, I think this fits in with the same type of cooperative agreement, because it's not up to the nation. The nation's not going to react fast enough. I mean, and if the nation is in cahoots with the federal agency coming on, that's a whole other issue.
Sure.
But if they aren't, if the federal government is asserting itself without any kind of approval from nation officials, then at the end of the day, it's the people. It's up to the people to stand up to it.
That was discussed yesterday, in that the raid that was made on the Cattaraugus territory by the ATF. No one responded from the administration. Robert Porter or any other executive officer didn't respond. There were a couple counselors who showed up, but the council in general didn't show up. And what that was is, what the argument point was that they weren't there because they're not supposed to protect individual business people.
Who's not?
And that's what the whole argument was.
Well, no, you're saying that
That-
some of the Seneca Nation government was saying they're not there, supposed to be there.
Robert Porter said that. Okay.
Wow.
Now, the point was, what my point was back to him was that he wasn't there to protect any particular business owner. He was there to protect the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation.
Exactly.
I mean,
And
you
if
take
he's not going to
obviously
do
you
that,
do
then
this.
you got to step down.
This isn't about defending, Will Perry necessarily. This is about, again, standing up to the incursion of the sovereignty. I mean, again, you don't necessarily have to like somebody who finds themselves in this situation to still not be offended by the federal government coming onto the territory. I mean, that should be the fact of the matter. Look, it's 1:15, so we're going to take a break. But yeah, we'll talk about this a little bit more, because I think a lot of this conversation comes back to, again, where is the role of the people, and how can we, how can any of us talk about organizing to step up more? Again, this is John Kane with Ross John and Ed Schindler in studio. We'll be right back. We're coming back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. Again, I know I've got my two guests here, Ed and Ross. You're both Senecas, so a lot of the conversation seems to be concentrated about the Seneca Nation. But these issues are in all of our territories. I mean, Tonawanda had almost 100 agents raid their territory back in February, and we still get left with this circumstance of how do we respond to it? And again, and I'm not gonna sit here and say that these raids are a direct result of a request from a native politician or a native tribal government leader. But again, if they aren't involved in it, then what is their response to it? And if there is no immediate response, and it would, I mean, those guys that came into Cattaraugus a couple of weeks ago, they were there for hours. There was plenty of time for people to congregate there. There was plenty of time for and even to not go there. The phone calls could have been being made at that time. The emails could have been being made at that time. There could have been some effort to respond to the fact that the federal government was violating the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation and the Seneca Nation people. And anybody would suggest, well, it's not the Seneca Nation's role to defend individuals. Well, I would think that it is their role. I mean, they're and again, you get into this debate about, what is the business community at large pitching into? I realize that Willie had his own issue with the Seneca Nation at the time. But so is it fair to say that the Seneca Nation was prepared to throw Willie under the bus, even though it involved violating the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation? It seems to me that, and Ed, you were mentioning that there's actually a law on the books today.
Yeah.
That's within the Seneca Nation that says nobody is authorized, no non-native is authorized to come onto the Seneca Nation territory armed without prior approval.
It's actually labeled law enforcement. No non-Indian law enforcement can go onto private property. This was done when state police were allegedly going to shut down the reservation in order to close down businesses to collect the tax for the state. They were waiting for the governor's Basically, that's what the story is. They were
Well,
waiting
and
for the
you
government
you can
signal.
look on my
So-
Facebook group page. The photos are really clear. These guys were armed,
Yes.
and they weren't just holstered. I mean, I know
No,
by the
they
time we were getting pictures of them outside, but the surveillance pictures that were taken inside, these guys came in with guns pointed, fingers on triggers, at right beside the community center. I might add.
Right.
So this
Yeah.
facility is right within gunshot range of where our kids are hanging out. So these guys came into there, and there was no outrage expressed by any Seneca Nation official. Obviously, there was a counselor that showed up there, and a candidate for council who showed up down there. But there really wasn't, frankly, there wasn't enough outrage. There just wasn't enough
If they
outrage.
had done this in Washington D.C. or Albany, they'd have been shot because they were dressed like they portray terrorists on the media.
Yeah, they had a couple of guys
They
that were
looked
wearing
like
ski masks,
Ski
dressed in
mask
black.
and dressed in black with weapons, automatic, and yet they allowed them to remain masked. Okay, the resolution that occurred was a resolution which denied any police agency, any law enforcement agency, the authority to take their weapons onto private property. They were allowed to patrol the roads as they said they had the right to do. Fine.
So
go ahead.
masked gunmen, were involved in this raid on our territory. I mean,
Yes.
it's just
And they
amazing to me. It's and again, this gets back to even if the Seneca Nation isn't fleet-footed enough to respond, and I guess that it begs the question: who should respond? And I still come down to the same thing: the people need to.
Well, but here's the one of the biggest issue that is just touched on is that you had our administration building right there. You have our library. You have our
Community center.
laundromat. You have housing. You have the community.
Yeah,
center.
residential
You have the
district is right
the
there.
seniors center right there. There isn't another place in this country that they would have been allowed to do that without suit. To be able to come in and put the public, so to speak, in that kind of jeopardy. And they're so brazen and have so much disrespect, and again, it seems like our officials, so-called officials, don't understand that, because it seems like there is, I'd have to say there probably is a political agenda that's out there. People were just very conveniently ducking and not available, but your responsibility, if you're going to take that position, is that you better have thick skin. And if you can't take a little bit of scolding from a few people and a little bit of people jockeying on the rules that you kind of set forward, then you don't belong there.
Well, and again, it begs the question, as you and you've been raising it for a while here, is for those people who are now have their hats thrown into the ring, whether it's for council or for these other positions, what are they going to do different? And again, I know that it's frustrating that again that even not just the agendas of these meetings, but even possibly the platform issues for an election have to be based on some of the state or federal agenda. But the reality is, defense of our territories is something that these guys can't dock. I'm not saying it's their responsibility even. I'm just saying, what is their position as it relates to even the people defending this? I mean, the last thing anybody wants to have a circumstance where a bunch of Senecas showed up because of a raid like this, and have their own Seneca government take a position against them.
That's why people didn't show up.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who didn't show up because they didn't want to lose their job.
Well, I mean, go back.
Literally.
Right.
Go back to the scuffle at the casino. The first statements that came out of Seneca Nation were apologies. Even though it was a native event at a native venue, two native guys having a bit of a disturbance, a New York State senator plugging himself into that whole thing, and not just as he originally said, assaulted as he and his wife were exiting the casino. This was a circumstance that they threw themselves in the first and immediate responses that came out of Robert Porter was an apology, and then he actually apologized that he said it's unfortunate that the Seneca Nation cannot control the actions of their individuals. And I'm thinking, really? You think that's unfortunate? And again, when you think about these statements, and again, one of the initial statements that came out of this whole out of this raid was, well, it's unfortunate that any of our people are involved in criminal activity. I mean, he almost
He was convicted by the government of the Seneca Nation.
I mean, instead of saying, look, we don't know what the circumstances are that we're here, but no matter what they are, there's no way that the federal government has the authority to come in with guns drawn, fingers on triggers, and subject any of our people, either intentionally or collaterally. And that's what we talked about with when you consider where this business is and the buildings and the environment that exists in. This thing was terrible. And the same thing happened in Tonawanda. And what I'm saying is, not only as a community, but as a community of Native people, we need to be able to step up and make sure that this kinds of thing does not happen without at very least, our people being more engaged in this thing. And I've said it before. If 25 or 30 or 100 agents show up on a Native territory, and 100 or 200 of our people show up at that circumstance, and it turns into just a non-confrontational standoff. Now we've turned it into the kind of public spectacle. Because one of the things that gets said to me, and of course I debunk this when people say, yeah, but do they really know in Washington what's happening on our territories? Well, I know because I can look on my blog tracker. I know how many hits my blog got the day after the raid at Wolf's Run. I know that because I can see it on my computer screen. But the reality is, if there's any question, if there's any doubt whether any of this stuff makes that kind of noise in Washington, then maybe we need to step up the circumstance a little bit more so we can ensure that it does. And if there was again a crowd, if a crowd had assembled around Wolf's Run, think about how many cars could have pulled in there. So those guys would have had to start worrying about how are we even going to pull out of here.
Right.
And I know as we talk about things happening in Tonawanda, if there's going to be some effort to go into Tonawanda to seize product or seize equipment or seize anything, I'm saying let's make sure that they can hold them off long enough for us to show up there and support them and make sure that the federal government does not have their way with those people either.
Yeah. One of the things that I found out yesterday at the council session was I talked with the chief marshal on the Cattaraugus territory, and he explained that they couldn't do anything. He was there, but he was there basically monitoring what they were doing.
Just observing.
But he said there was nothing he could do because he wasn't ordered to do so by the president. He and two other marshals were at the council session, and what they explained was they had to do what their boss told them, and they said our boss is the president.
Was there even a line of communication during the circumstance? I I wondered, was there ever any engagement between the marshals that were on the scene and the supposedly the ones who can tell them what to do or not to do?
If there was, he told me that he was supposed to just monitor and observe. I said, why didn't you uphold a resolution that had been passed where they were bringing weapons onto the private property? And he said, "There's such."
He probably wasn't even aware that such a thing existed.
And Rob Porter claimed he didn't know about it either. And the thing about it is, I know about it because I was the one arguing for it against the state police when the state police were threatening to come on our territory. And what was being said was, don't bring your weapons onto private property because you'll just accelerate possible violence. Leave your weapons off. If you need to come on with the marshals. Don't bring weapons. Whatever you have to do so in a manner which is not going to be promoting violence.
There's another spin on that. Is that, okay, at least in my opinion, is that the marshals, chief marshal, and a number of marshal positions within the Seneca Nation aren't underneath the president. They're elected positions.
Yeah. They
stand alone. And I remember when I was sitting on council, I used to tell these guys and make a pitch that you guys should have your own understanding. You should have, at the time, hate to say it, but your own legal representative because to have to run through the government and the attorneys that the president and the council are using. We can ask you to and direct you to do things that are illegal.
Well, and then again,
that you have no business doing.
if they're first responders, if they got to be there, and then they find out that what the nation bails on them.
Right.
So you're right. They do need to have some
So,
sort
and
of,
that's what I'm saying is that these, I said it's easy for counselors and it's easy for executives to make you stick your neck out there, but they're not indemnifying you.
No, they're not.
They can't. And it's like, so you better understand what your responsibilities are, you know, what you have what you're capable of doing, and you know where you're protected. And
What's your
you
handbook?
have to be able to tell people is that no, I can't do that. You know, by law, by constitution, by my elected position. There's other agencies or there's other entities that need to be in the same situation.
They also need to be bound what they can do, can and can't do, but also what they can and can't allow. And
Right.
and I think there's some basic things that you're talking about, Ed. Here is that if there's unless they've been told otherwise, if there's a law in the books that said that a non-native law enforcement agent
Sure.
is forbidden to be on there with packing heat, then then all the more reason for a bunch of people to be down there supporting the marshals.
That supersedes basically in our
Right.
system at this time. That supersedes any directive from a president or a council.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that would have to be a changed council resolution. Look, it's about the hour, so we're gonna take a break. Again, I've got Ross John in studio. I've got Ed Schindler in studio. We're talking about some pretty detailed and important issues that face our communities and the role that the people have to play in these roles. So we're gonna take a break and come on right back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. You know what? As we go through some of this stuff during the break here, Ed, you mentioned that this really gets down to the issue that you are almost always talking about, which is education. At the end of the day, I think when we talk about education, it's not reading, writing, and arithmetic. This has to be some of the education has to be geared towards what our responsibilities are, and I think when we talk about responsibilities, it fits in with this whole notion that we're talking about here with cooperatives. I mean, what is the responsibility of a community member? Not just what is somebody empowered to do once they've been elected into office or hired by the nation, but what is your responsibility as a I don't even say citizen, but as a person within your community? Because again, we get caught into the language of our non-native counterparts. We use words like nation. We use words like citizen.
Mm-hmm.
We use words like members. And at the end of the day, the Mohawk word for the Seneca is onundawaga. What is it for Seneca?
Onondawaga.
Onundawaga. Okay. So, and that breaks down at the end of the day to the people. It is the people that are from the land of the mountains. It is the people. So we got to keep in mind that regardless of anything else, if we're going to really be tied to our history, into the identity associated with our history, we have to remember that it isn't about the institution. It isn't about the nation as an institution. It isn't a citizen is a subdivision of that institution. A citizen, by definition, it means that you have an obligation or an allegiance to a government, and for that allegiance, by Webster's dictionary definition, it says that a citizen is somebody who has an allegiance to a government, and in return, that government offers something back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there's a whole lot of people that live within each one of our native territories that don't necessarily feel like they have an allegiance to to what the federal government recognizes as the tribal government, and that could be that allegiance is somewhat suspect, whether it's traditional government or elected government. But at the end of the day, with or without that allegiance to an administration, we do have a responsibility to our community, so I guess I'll let you kind of chime in a little bit on on when you talk education, what you're talking about.
The biggest point is in education is basically introducing the concepts and the understandings so that people will understand in their mind what Ross and you are talking about, what they're doing. So basically you're talking about getting a mental understanding to take action. And if people don't have that mental understanding, then action doesn't occur because they don't know what's going on or why. And that's two things that people need to know as to before they will take action, is what and why.
Well, and complacency is what happens when you have tribal government that takes over the management of so many aspects of our lives,
Literally.
then what happens is you end up with a certain level of complacency within a community. And whether it's intended or not, that complacency ends up contributing to being complicit with what with again with the outside agencies. If we all just sit back and do nothing, then we allow what takes place on our territory to happen. And through the kind of education that you've tried to promote, almost in every conversation, you try to promote this education so people understand that not just what the rights are, but what the responsibilities are.
Yeah. What I'd like to share with people is that it isn't that they have to learn and memorize the Ganasakawa or the creation story or whatever, but try to understand and comprehend the ability to learn. Okay, everyone has the ability to learn, and it's going to be based upon what is their interest. But what I found is that people do have interest within our territory. They identify as being Seneca. The problem is that they don't know what that means. They identify as being Haudenosaunee. They wear around the Hiawatha belt. They may not know that that's the Hiawatha belt of the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee, but they still identify as being part of the Haudenosaunee.
They got a flag flying right in front of the Seneca
Yes.
administration buildings. They've got the American flag, they've got the Seneca logo on a flag, and they got the Hiawatha belt flying there.
That's step one of being able to do that, and I think that's what's necessary for the children, because what's happening is the children are identifying, they're getting an identity, all right, and I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the kids are growing up to find out they're going to figure out how much beer they can drink or how many drugs they can take and all that stuff, because that's the identity that they're absorbing, and it's not one that's going to help them. Okay, and that's why my concern is is what's going to happen to them, and unfortunately we're not looking over that as a people. We have to do that, not only here within the Seneca territory, but throughout the entire Six Nations and beyond. And I think that's step one of just understanding that's a responsibility.
Well, and the problem is they're not going to learn that in public school.
No, they're not.
And frankly, our communities as a whole, and certainly the Seneca Nation, does very little to promote responsibility in terms of what our kids. I mean, when you talk about sense of community, I'm not just talking about personal responsibility. We talk about that, and whether it's the Code of Handsome Lake, or whether it's or whether it's some ethics law that the Seneca Nation tries to promote, that kind of a personal responsibility, which I don't think is addressed strongly enough in our community, is one issue. But the other issue is community responsibility, and that's what we're talking about here with this cooperative issue. Not only what are we, what should we do, but what are we capable of doing, and how can we create not the institutions, but how do we create an environment where we can not only do these things, but again address the educational needs, so people understand. Yeah, we all have a responsibility. It isn't just about government.
Part of the thing, I think, part of the conversation and the point that I'd like to make clear and kind of get back to is that, this conversation tonight, I want people to understand is that it's the complacency that is very detrimental to who we are, and there's not enough people that are understanding that, there is empowerment, and there's responsibility for what they have to be able to do. It's very, you have to have a certain amount of grit to be sovereign. Mm-hmm. You have to have that grit to be sustainable, and there is a process of learning and looking back at yourself, and a sense of building community that builds that grit. And you're not going to find it via the institution of government. You're going to find that complacency. You're going to find the graft. You're going to find the welfare and everything else that kind of goes on to it. And those are things that have undermined the human capability, the individual capability and rights of our people.
I mean, the idea of corruption in government, I mean, those things seem to go hand in hand in any society, because when people get plugged into the sense of empowerment, they also plug themselves into the sense of entitlement. Now, and I hear people say all the time,
you have to be a little conceited again to consider yourself a leader.
Well, and it's kind of a popularity contest. Let's face it. I mean, right. So you you have to have a bit of an ego to even throw yourself into that ring. And I'm
But
not saying that.
but it doesn't garner the respect. There are people in our community that are far removed from the political system that have far more respect than anybody that I've ever seen run for office.
And that's true.
It's because of their effort, because of what they put forward, and they just very quietly take care of things.
Well, and again, I think when people do put themselves into that circumstance, if they again they start to isolate themselves from the people. That's where again, and that's why you have this circumstance where people are always complaining about there being almost a two-tiered system of responsibility,
for those
government
people,
versus the people.
For those people that are going to run for office this time around and future people that are going to run, they need to understand that it's not just this passive act that's separating them from their people. They're being pulled along. And maybe without even understanding that it may be against their will if they really started to learn, what took place and how we got in this position. They need to learn.
Well, and on the flip side, I want to be clear that I think that the community not has to be more responsible, and in that community, I mean the business community. I mean, there are lots of dollars being made in the private sector, and of course, there's even more dollars being made by the Seneca Nation. But I think that the business leaders do have, if they're going to wrestle some of that control back away from the nation that I hear people talking about all the time, they can't just do it to line their own pockets. They've got to figure out where in this model of cooperatives, where in this model of community are they going to find themselves? Because I hear people say, well, that such and such made $1 million on the sovereignty of our people. Well, I don't view it that way. Sovereignty is a birthright, and we all have that right. Now, the question is, if somebody is going to be in one of those circumstances where they have gotten themselves in a position to accumulate large amounts of wealth and large amounts of things, what are they going to give back to the community, and how are they going to do it? And I'm not saying there's one path to doing that, but I do think that those people who have generated lots of money, and they have generated a lot of personal wealth and success, I think it is really hard to judge somebody's success if their community is successful as well.
Well, we haven't been able to even sit down and take the pressure off ourselves in order to even have an intelligent conversation about how we could better benefit our community, because we have outside agencies, and at this time we have our own government that just applying regulation and
when your backs are against the wall, and everybody who is in business knows that they have to have the resources to fight the federal government, and that's not a cheap thing to do. So I understand that, and I think that again is part of the whole problem. Look, it's quarter till. We got to have one more segment to complete this show, and we'll probably close it strong. So come on back. I've got Ross John and Ed Schindler in studio. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
It's the home of smoking deals.
What the fuck, you trying to give my money away?
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. We're winding down here. This is the last segment. We've been talking a lot about about personal responsibility and about community responsibility, and again, we know that we have issues in our territory that are not ever going to be addressed by tribal government, and they're not going to be addressed by state government. They're not going to be addressed by federal government. And I think even when we talk about the types of cooperatives that we're talking about here, the more the people get engaged in some of these aspects of our lives, the more the people will be engaged in the things that even the peer pressure associated with personal responsibility. I know we know that we have alcohol problems and we have drug problems, and I don't know that they're any worse on our territories than they are off territories, but I'm not concerned about what happens off our territories, and we know what exists out there to combat that, and we know how much they fail. I mean, let's face it.